The printer blinked red at the worst possible moment. I stared at the error message, my heart hammering against my ribs. Our biggest client presentation was due in 20 minutes, and this ancient machine had just decided to die on me. I pressed every button I could find. Nothing. The paper tray was full, the ink was fresh, but the stupid thing wouldn't budge. Around me, the office buzzed with nervous energy. Everyone knew how important this handover was for Trueform Industries. "Come on," I whispered, unplugging the machine and plugging it back in. Still nothing. That's when I heard the heavy footsteps behind me. Callum's voice cut through the office chatter like a knife. "What's the holdup, Tessa?" I turned around to see my boss standing there, his face already twisted with irritation. Behind him, 3 other executives watched like vultures circling a carcass. "The printer's jammed," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm trying to." "Are you kidding me right now?" His voice rose, and suddenly the entire office went silent. "This is sabotage." My stomach dropped. "What?" No, I would never, but his eyes were already burning with accusation, and I knew my 12 years at this company were about to end. "You did this on purpose," Callum snarled, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You knew exactly what this presentation meant to us." I felt heat creep up my neck. "That's completely ridiculous." "Why would I sabotage my own work?" "Because you're bitter about the promotion you didn't get," he shot back. "Because you can't handle that someone younger got the position you wanted." The unfairness of it hit me like a slap. I had trained that younger employee. I had created half the templates they were using. I had worked overtime for 3 months straight to make this client transition perfect. "Callum, please, just listen." "No, you listen." He stepped closer, and I could smell the coffee on his breath. "I've had enough of your attitude problem. Your constant questioning of my decisions. Your little smirks in meetings." Around us, my co-workers had stopped pretending to work. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed to be enjoying the show. Not one person spoke up for me. "This printer thing is just the final straw," Callum continued. "You're done here, Tessa. Clear your desk." The words hung in the air like smoke. After 12 years of 60-hour weeks, missed birthdays, and cancelled vacations, it was over. Just like that. "You can't be serious," I whispered. But his cold smile told me everything I needed to know. The walk to my desk felt like walking through quicksand. Every step took forever, and everyone was staring. I could hear whispers starting behind me as people processed what they'd just witnessed. My hands shook as I opened my desk drawers. 12 years of my life scattered across 3 small spaces. Photos, awards, the coffee mug my team gave me last Christmas. It all felt so pathetic now. Nobody said anything to me. Not even Jenna from accounting, who I'd covered for when she was going through her divorce. Not Kyle from marketing, who still owed me lunch from 6 months ago. They all just watched as I stuffed my personal items into a cardboard box. The silence was deafening. I could hear the office air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic outside, but no human voices. It was like I'd already become invisible. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. It was from Harrison Blake, CEO of Delgatech Industries. Our biggest client. The message was timestamped just 2 minutes ago. "Tessa, urgent. Need to speak with you privately ASAP. Can you call when you get a chance?" I stared at the message, reading it 3 times. Then I looked up at Callum, who was watching me from across the office with satisfied eyes. He had no idea what was coming. 2 weeks earlier, I'd been sitting in the conference room with Harrison Blake and his team. The quarterly review had gone better than expected. Delgatech's numbers were up, their satisfaction scores were through the roof, and everything was running smooth. That's when Harrison had pulled me aside after the meeting. "Tessa, I need to ask you something," he'd said, glancing around to make sure we were alone. "How would you feel about working with us directly?" I'd been confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean cutting out the middleman. Working with you personally, not through Trueform. You're the one who makes everything work anyway." The offer had been tempting. Really tempting. Harrison was talking about a contract worth millions, and he wanted to give it all to me. But I'd been loyal to Trueform for over a decade. "I appreciate the offer," I told him. "But I can't do that to my company." He nodded, but I could see disappointment in his eyes. "I understand. But if you ever change your mind, the door's always open." I'd thought about that conversation every day since. The money he'd mentioned was more than I made in 3 years at Trueform. But loyalty meant something to me. At least, it had meant something to me before today. Now, staring at his text message while Callum smirked from across the office, loyalty felt like the stupidest thing in the world. I waited until I was in my car to call Harrison back. My hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, but I managed to dial his number. He picked up on the first ring. "Tessa. Thank God you called. I just heard what happened." "You heard already?" I was surprised. It had only been 20 minutes since Callum fired me. Word travels fast in our industry. Especially when someone makes a mistake as big as Callum just did. Harrison's voice was calm, but I could hear anger underneath. "Are you okay?" "I'm processing," I said honestly. It all happened so fast. "Listen, I know this isn't the ideal time to bring this up, but my offer from 2 weeks ago still stands. Actually, it's even stronger now." I felt my pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" "I mean we were already planning to leave Trueform at the end of this contract cycle. Their service has been slipping for months. The only reason we stayed was because of you." The words hit me like electricity. "Really? Really? And after what just happened, we're moving up our timeline. We want to work with you directly, Tessa. Starting immediately." I sat in my car in the Trueform parking lot, watching my former coworkers through the windows. They were probably already gossiping about my dramatic exit. What would that look like? I asked. Full creative control. Your own business. Your own terms. And a budget that will make your head spin. My heart was racing now. When would you need an answer? How about tonight? Can you hop on a video call at 8? I looked back at the office building where I'd wasted 12 years of my life. Yes, I said. Definitely yes. The HR meeting was exactly what I expected. Sterile, corporate, and completely pointless. "This is difficult for all of us," said Patricia from Human Resources, shuffling through paperwork like she was ordering lunch. "But the decision has been made." I sat across from her, recording everything on my phone. Not because I planned to sue them, but because I wanted documentation of how they'd treat a 12-year employee. "The official reason for termination is performance-related," Patricia continued. "Specifically, today's incident with the client presentation." "The printer jam?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Among other things. There have been concerns about your attitude and teamwork skills." This was news to me. "What concerns? From who?" Patricia glanced at her notes. "That's confidential. But the decision is final." I nodded calmly. Inside, I was furious, but I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down. "I understand," I said. "Can I get copies of my performance reviews from the past year?" "That won't be necessary." "Actually, I think it will be. I'd like to see these attitude concerns you're talking about." Patricia shifted uncomfortably. We'll mail them to you. I knew they wouldn't. But I also knew I already had copies of everything I needed. Every glowing review, every client compliment, every email thanking me for going above and beyond. Callum had picked the wrong person to frame. Before leaving the building, I made one last stop at my computer. I had exactly 15 minutes before my access would be revoked, and I intended to use every second. I backed up every file I could think of. Project templates I'd created, client communication strategies, workflow documents that had taken me years to perfect. If they wanted to fire me, fine. But they weren't keeping the intellectual property I'd developed. I also grabbed something else, the security camera report from this morning. As the project manager, I had access to building maintenance records. And according to the system, the printer had been reported as malfunctioning for 3 days. 3 days. Which meant maintenance knew it was broken. Which meant Callum knew it was broken. Which meant this whole sabotage story was complete garbage. I saved the report to my personal cloud storage, along with screenshots of Callum's own emails about postponing printer repairs to save money. My computer screen went black at exactly 3:47 p.m. Right on schedule. I picked up my box of personal items and walked toward the exit. At the door, I turned back for one last look at the office where I'd spent so much of my adult life. Callum was standing by his office window, watching me leave. He raised his coffee mug in a mock toast. I smiled back at him. He had no idea that I'd just downloaded the evidence that would destroy him. The video call with Harrison started exactly at 8 p.m. I'd spent the afternoon setting up a makeshift home office and trying to process everything that had happened. "Tessa, you look great considering the day you've had," Harrison said as his face appeared on my laptop screen. Behind him, I could see his executive team gathered around the conference table. "Thanks. I'm still processing everything." "Well, let me give you something positive to think about." Harrison leaned forward. "We want to offer you a 3-year exclusive contract to handle all of our client operations." The number he mentioned made my head spin. It was more money than I'd ever dreamed of making. "But here's the thing," Harrison continued. "We need this to happen fast. Trueform's contract with us expires at the end of this month, and we don't want any gap in service." "How fast?" "We need a signed agreement and a registered business entity by tomorrow morning." I felt a flutter of panic. "That's less than 12 hours. I know it's tight. But my legal team is standing by to help with the paperwork. We can walk you through everything tonight." I thought about Callum's smug face. About Patricia's dismissive attitude. About 12 years of my life being thrown away over a printer that they knew was broken. "What would you need from me?" I asked. "Just say yes, and we'll handle the rest." I looked around my apartment. Quiet, peaceful, and completely under my control. "Yes," I said. "Let's do this." The smile that spread across Harrison's face told me I'd just made the best decision of my life. "I need you to understand something," I told Harrison as his legal team pulled up documents on their computers. "If we're doing this, I want complete creative control. Done. And I want my own brand identity. Not just a subcontractor relationship. Absolutely. And I want to be the primary point of contact for all client communications. No intermediaries." Harrison nodded enthusiastically. "Tessa, you're exactly what we've been looking for. Someone who thinks like an owner, not just an employee." His lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Vanessa, leaned into the camera. "We can have your LLC registered in Delaware by morning. The paperwork is already drafted. What about the contract terms?" 3 years, renewable. Full benefits package. Annual value of $3.2 million. The number hit me again. At Trueform, my entire salary for 5 years hadn't added up to what these people were offering me for 1 year. There's just one condition, I said, surprising myself with how confident I sounded. Harrison raised his eyebrows. What's that? I want you to send my resignation letter to Trueform personally. Tomorrow morning. I want them to know that their biggest client just walked away with the employee they fired. The conference room erupted in laughter. Consider it done, Harrison said. In fact, I'll deliver it myself. I spent the next 4 hours on the phone with lawyers, accountants, and business registration specialists. By midnight, I was the owner of Colby Consulting Solutions, LLC. By morning, I would be Trueform's biggest nightmare. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I built a business from scratch. By 3 a.m., I had a professional website with my portfolio, testimonials from previous clients, and a service offering that was twice as comprehensive as anything Trueform provided. By 5 a.m., I had business cards designed and ordered for rush delivery. By 6 a.m., I had written a project proposal that would make Delgateca's transition seamless and cost-effective. The whole time, I kept thinking about Callum's face when he'd fired me. The satisfaction in his eyes. The way he'd enjoyed humiliating me in front of the entire office. Well, he was about to learn what humiliation really felt like. At 7:03 a.m., I sent Harrison my completed proposal along with my business registration documents. Everything was perfect, professional, and ready to go. At 7:15 a.m., Harrison replied, "This is incredible work. We're signing immediately." At 7:23 a.m., I received the executed contract in my email. 3 years, $2 million annually, with clauses for expansion and performance bonuses. At 7:30 a.m., I watched from my apartment window as Harrison's car pulled into the Trueform parking lot. He was about to deliver my resignation letter personally, along with Delgateca's notice of contract termination. Callum was about to have the worst morning of his professional life. And honestly, I couldn't wait to see his reaction. Have you ever had a moment where everything changed instantly? Drop a comment below and tell me about a time when your life took an unexpected turn. And if you're enjoying this story of sweet revenge, hit that like button, because trust me, we're just getting started. I didn't have to wait long to see the chaos unfold. At 8:12 a.m., my phone started buzzing with notifications. LinkedIn activity from Trueform employees. Text messages from former coworkers. Word was spreading fast. At 8:15 a.m., Callum called me. I let it ring. At 8:17 a.m., he called again. I let it ring again. At 8:20 a.m., he sent a text, "We need to talk immediately." I deleted it without responding. At 8:25 a.m., my former coworker Kyle texted me, "Holy shit, what just happened? The whole office is in chaos." I replied, "Karma." At 8:30 a.m., Patricia from HR called me. This time, I answered. "Tessa, there's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice strained. "We need you to come in and discuss your termination." "I think you mean my resignation," I corrected her. "And there's nothing to discuss. Please, I hung up. At 8:45 a.m., I received an email from Trueform's CEO, someone I'd never spoken to directly in 12 years of employment. The subject line read, "Urgent meeting request." I marked it as spam. At 9 a.m., Kyle texted again, "Callum is locked in the conference room with the board. People are saying he might get fired." I smiled and made myself coffee. The morning was going exactly as planned. But this was just the beginning. I had so much more in store for them. The desperation email arrived at 11:30 a.m. It was from Callum, written with the kind of professional panic that only comes from watching your career implode in real time. "Tessa, I think we got off on the wrong foot this morning. I may have reacted hastily to the printer situation. Perhaps we can work out a subcontracting arrangement that benefits everyone. I read it 3 times, savoring every word. A subcontracting arrangement. He wanted to pay me to do the work that he'd just fired me for not being able to do. The audacity was breathtaking. I waited 2 hours before responding. Long enough for him to sweat, but not long enough for him to think I wasn't interested. Callum, thank you for reaching out. I'd be happy to discuss a subcontracting arrangement. My rate is $300 per hour, with a minimum of 40 hours per week. Payment is due weekly, in advance. All work will be reviewed in mandatory meetings with me personally, every Friday at 3 p.m. Let me know if these terms are acceptable. My rate at Trueform had been equivalent to $35 per hour. I was asking for nearly 10 times that amount. Plus, the weekly meetings were designed to be as humiliating as possible. Every Friday, Callum would have to sit across from me and explain what his team had accomplished with my work. I sent the email and leaned back in my chair. Let's see how badly they needed me. The response came back in 6 minutes. Terms accepted. When can you start? While Callum was panicking, I was getting more interesting intelligence from inside Trueform. Kyle had been texting me updates all day. The new hire they'd brought in to replace me had quit after 4 hours. Apparently, she'd taken one look at the client files and declared the situation impossible. 2 other employees had submitted their resignations by noon. But the most interesting message came from someone unexpected, Brianna from the design team. Tessa, I have something you need to know. Can we meet for coffee? I'd always liked Brianna. She was quiet, competent, and had never gotten involved in office politics. If she wanted to meet, it was important. We met at a cafe down the street from Trueform. She looked nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder like she expected Callum to burst through the door. I need to tell you something about this morning, she said, leaning across the table. About the printer. What about it? Callum knew it was broken. He's been putting off the repair for weeks because he didn't want to spend the money. I nodded. I figured as much. But there's more. She glanced around again. He planned the whole thing. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. What do you mean, planned? He knew you'd be the one printing the presentation. He knew the printer would fail. He was waiting for it to happen so he could blame you. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. It was one thing to fire someone over a genuine mistake. It was another thing entirely to set them up for failure. Why are you telling me this? Brianna's eyes hardened. Because I'm tired of watching good people get destroyed by that man. And because I have proof. The proof was even better than I'd hoped. Brianna had been working late the night before, finishing up some designs. She'd overheard Callum on a phone call with someone from the board, discussing the Tessa problem. But more importantly, she'd seen him near the printer. Doing something to it. I didn't think much of it at the time, she explained. But when everything happened this morning, I remembered. So I checked the security footage. She showed me the video on her phone. There was Callum, at 7:30 p.m. yesterday, clearly tampering with the printer mechanism. He sabotaged it himself, I whispered. And then blamed you for the sabotage. It's disgusting. I stared at the video, watching Callum deliberately break the machine that would ruin my career 12 hours later. Can you send me this? Already did. It's in your email. I hugged her right there in the coffee shop. Brianna, you just gave me everything I need to destroy him. Good, she said fiercely. That man has been terrorizing people for years. It's time someone fought back. I forwarded the video to Trueform's board of directors before I even left the cafe. The subject line read: The real story behind this morning's events. By the time I got home, Callum had been suspended pending an internal investigation. Justice was starting to taste pretty sweet. The call from Trueform's CEO came at 6 p.m. "Ms. Colby, this is Jonathan Hartfield. I believe you know why I'm calling." I'd never spoken to Jonathan directly, but I knew who he was. The founder's son, brought in to clean up the company's reputation after a series of scandals. "I think I do," I said carefully. "We've reviewed the security footage. And we've investigated Mr. Callum's claims about your performance. I owe you a significant apology." "I appreciate that. But an apology isn't enough. We'd like to discuss bringing you back. Under new leadership, of course." I almost laughed. Bringing me back? With a promotion. And a substantial raise. And a guarantee that nothing like this morning will ever happen again. The offer was tempting. Return to familiar surroundings, work with people I knew, rebuild the relationships that had been damaged. But then I thought about my conversation with Harrison this morning. About the $3.2 million contract sitting in my email. About the freedom to build something entirely my own. "Jonathan, I appreciate the offer. But I'm not interested in being an employee anymore." There was silence on the other end of the line. "However," I continued, "I might be interested in a different kind of arrangement." "What did you have in mind?" I smiled. "How about I tell you over dinner tomorrow night?" By the time we hung up, we'd scheduled a meeting to discuss Trueform contracting with my new company. The company that would be operating out of their old conference room. With their former client paying the bills. It was poetic justice at its finest. The internal investigation moved faster than I'd expected. By Wednesday morning, Callum was gone. Not just fired. Destroyed. Kyle sent me the details via text. They found other stuff. Forged performance reviews. Falsified billing records. The board stripped his severance package and threatened legal action. I felt a moment of something that might have been sympathy. Then I remembered the satisfied look on his face when he'd humiliated me in front of the entire office. The sympathy passed quickly. By Thursday, 3 more employees had quit. Word was getting around that Trueform was a sinking ship, and people were jumping overboard as fast as they could. By Friday, I had my first official meeting as a contractor in Trueform's conference room. Walking into that building as a client instead of an employee was surreal. The security guard who'd watched me leave in shame 4 days earlier now greeted me with professional respect. "Good morning, Ms. Colby. They're waiting for you in conference room A." I rode the elevator to the same floor where I'd worked for 12 years. But instead of going to my old cubicle, I walked into the executive conference room. Jonathan Hartfield stood up when I entered. "Tessa, thank you for coming." Around the table sat the remaining board members, looking nervous and contrite. "Before we begin," I said, setting my briefcase on the table, "I have some conditions." Jonathan nodded. "We're listening." "First, I work as an independent contractor only. No employee relationship whatsoever." "Agreed." "Second, all communication goes through me directly. No intermediaries, no account managers, no project coordinators." "Understood." "Third, I choose my own team. If I need to hire subcontractors, I hire them. If I need to fire people, I fire them. That seems reasonable." I smiled. "And finally, I get Callum's old office." The room was silent for a moment. Then Jonathan started laughing. "Consider it done." Setting up my new office was therapeutic in ways I hadn't expected. Callum's corner office had floor-to-ceiling windows and twice the space of my old cubicle. More importantly, it had a direct view of the printing station where my life had changed 4 days earlier. I brought in my own furniture, my own equipment, and most satisfying of all, my own printer. A top-of-the-line model that would never, ever jam. My first act as the office's new occupant was to have the old broken printer delivered to my desk. I attached a note, "Still jammed?" Then I called maintenance and had them set it up as a decoration. Every time someone walked past my office, they'd see it sitting there. A reminder of how quickly things could change. My second act was to review the applications from former Trueform employees who wanted to work for my company. There were more than I'd expected. Apparently, watching someone go from fired to boss in less than a week had made quite an impression. Most of the applications were straightforward. Good people who'd been stuck in a toxic environment, looking for a chance to do better work. But one application stood out for all the wrong reasons. It was from Stephanie, the office gossip who'd spent years making snide comments about my clothes, my work style, and my personal life. The same Stephanie who'd been noticeably silent when Callum was screaming at me Monday morning. Now she wanted to work for me. The irony was delicious. I scheduled Stephanie's interview for Friday afternoon, right after my weekly check-in with the Trueform board. The meeting with Jonathan and his team had gone perfectly. My first week's deliverables had exceeded expectations, client satisfaction was up, and 3 new prospects had signed on based on referrals. "This is exactly what we needed," Jonathan told me as we wrapped up. "You've turned around our entire client services operation in 1 week. Just wait until you see what I can do with a full month," I replied. After they left, I had 20 minutes before Stephanie's interview. I used the time to review her application one more time. On paper, she was qualified. 5 years of project management experience, good technical skills, solid references from previous employers. But I remembered every eye roll, every whispered comment, every moment when she'd made my work life a little bit harder. When she knocked on my office door, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the confident woman who'd spent years undermining people behind their backs. In her place was someone who looked genuinely nervous. "Tessa, thank you so much for considering me for this position. Have a seat, Stephanie. Let's talk." I kept the interview professional and thorough. Asked about her experience, her goals, her thoughts on teamwork and collaboration. She gave all the right answers. Talked about respect, communication, and supporting colleagues. Everything she'd failed to do for the 5 years we'd worked together. "I have one final question," I said as the interview wrapped up. "Why do you want to work for me?" She hesitated. "Because you're building something special here. And I want to be part of it." I nodded thoughtfully. "I'll be in touch." After she left, I made my decision. I hired Stephanie. But not for the reasons she thought. The position I offered her was entry-level project coordination, reporting directly to my newest hire, a brilliant 22-year-old analyst named Emma who'd just graduated from business school. Stephanie would be taking orders from someone 15 years younger than her, doing work that was beneath her skill level, for a salary that was barely above minimum wage. But it was a job. And given Trueform's reputation in the industry after the Callum scandal, she didn't have many other options. She accepted immediately. "I'm so grateful for this opportunity," she gushed during the follow-up call. "I promise you won't regret this." I didn't tell her that I'd already decided exactly how much I was going to regret it. Emma, on the other hand, was everything Stephanie wasn't. Smart, collaborative, eager to learn, and completely free of the toxic attitude that had poisoned Trueform's culture for years. "I want you to know," I told Emma during her onboarding, "that Stephanie will be working under you. She has more experience, but you have better judgment. Trust your instincts." Emma nodded. "What if she pushes back on my decisions?" "Then you come to me. And I'll handle it." The beauty of the arrangement was that Stephanie couldn't complain. She was lucky to have a job at all, and everyone knew it. Plus, watching her take direction from someone she would have dismissed as just a kid was going to be endlessly entertaining. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's just giving people exactly what they deserve. 3 weeks into the new arrangement, everything was running like clockwork. My client base had expanded to include 2 more major accounts, both of whom had left their previous agency specifically to work with me. The Trueform partnership was generating steady revenue for both companies, with clear boundaries and mutual respect. And Stephanie was learning what it felt like to be on the receiving end of workplace politics. The breaking point came during a team meeting about a new client proposal. Emma had developed a strategy that was innovative, cost-effective, and perfectly aligned with the client's needs. Stephanie, apparently forgetting that she was no longer in a position to undermine people, made one of her classic dismissive comments. "That's a nice idea, Emma, but those of us with actual experience know it won't work in the real world." The room went silent. Emma's face flushed red. I leaned back in my chair. "Stephanie, can you explain what specific experience you're referring to?" "Well, I've been doing this for 5 years, and in those 5 years, how many client proposals did you develop independently?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. I was more focused on execution than strategy. "Right. So your experience is in following other people's directions, not creating solutions." The rest of the team was trying not to smile. Stephanie's face was getting redder by the second. "Emma," I continued, "please walk us through your proposal. I'm interested in hearing the details." Emma's presentation was brilliant. Thorough, creative, and completely professional. Stephanie didn't say another word for the rest of the meeting. The final piece of my revenge puzzle fell into place a month later. I was reviewing the contract renewal terms with Jonathan when he mentioned something interesting. "We've been thinking about the performance clauses in our agreement," he said. "Given how well things have been going, we'd like to add some incentive bonuses." "What kind of incentives?" "If you maintain our current client satisfaction ratings, you get a 20% bonus. If you bring in new business that exceeds our target by 50%, you get access to our partner referral network." I paused. "What exactly is in the partner referral network?" Jonathan smiled. "Contact information for every major client we've worked with in the past 10 years. Including the ones we've lost." I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside I was celebrating. Access to that network would essentially give me the foundation for my own empire. "And if you exceed targets by 100%, Jonathan continued, the referral access becomes permanent, even if you decide not to renew the contract." This was better than I'd dared to hope. "Those terms seem fair," I said carefully. We shook hands on the deal that afternoon. By evening, I was already planning my strategy to exceed their targets by 200%. The company that had fired me over a printer jam was about to hand me the keys to their entire industry network. And the best part? They were doing it voluntarily, because I was making them so much money they couldn't afford to lose me. Callum would have appreciated the irony, if he hadn't been banned from the industry for fraud. 6 months after being fired, I was running a multi-million-dollar consulting firm from my former boss's office. The transformation had been remarkable. What started as a revenge plot had evolved into something much bigger, a genuinely successful business that was changing how companies approached client services. My team had grown to 12 people, all of them hand-picked for their skills and their character. No office politics, no toxic behavior, no tolerance for the kind of workplace bullying that had defined Trueform's culture. Stephanie had lasted 3 months before quitting. Apparently, being held accountable for her work and her attitude was more than she could handle. "This isn't a good fit for me," she'd said during her exit interview. "I agree," I'd replied. "Best of luck in your future endeavors." Emma, on the other hand, had thrived. I'd promoted her twice and was grooming her to take on even bigger responsibilities. The difference between treating people well and treating them poorly was stark. When you invested in good people, they invested back. When you created a toxic environment, you got toxic results. I thought about this while reviewing the quarterly numbers. Revenue was up 300% from my initial projections. Client satisfaction was at an all-time high. And we had a waiting list of companies that wanted to work with us. More importantly, I woke up every morning excited about the work I was doing. That was something I'd never experienced in 12 years at Trueform. The legal clause that Jonathan had added to my contract turned out to be even more valuable than I'd expected. Not only had I exceeded their performance targets by 200%, but I'd done it so consistently that they'd offered me a permanent partnership in their referral network. Which meant I now had access to contact information for every major corporation they'd worked with in the past decade, including the ones they'd lost due to poor service. My lawyer had a field day with the contract terms. "Tessa, do you understand what this means?" Vanessa asked during our review meeting. "If they default on any of their obligations to you, you get to keep the referral access permanently, even if you're no longer working with them." What constitutes a default? Late payments, changes to agreed upon terms, any material breach of the contract. I smiled. And what are the chances they'll default on something over the next 2 years? Based on their track record? Pretty high. Companies going through leadership transitions usually struggle with consistency. So either way, I win. Either way, you win. That night, I celebrated by taking my entire team out for dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town. We'd come so far from that horrible Monday morning when Callum had destroyed my career over a printer jam. Now, that printer was sitting in my office as a trophy. A reminder that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. The final chapter of Callum's downfall came through Kyle, who'd taken a job at a different company but still kept in touch with the Trueform gossip network. "You're not going to believe this," he texted me one afternoon. Callum tried to get hired at Hoffman and Associates. They called Trueform for a reference. And Jonathan told them everything. The sabotage, the fraud, the wrongful termination. They rescinded the offer. I felt a twinge of something that might have been sympathy. Then I remembered the look on his face when he'd fired me, and the feeling passed. "But wait, there's more," Kyle continued. "Apparently, this is the 5th job offer that's been rescinded. Word is getting around. He's basically unemployable now. The industry we worked in was smaller than people realized. When someone had a reputation for dishonesty and sabotage, that information traveled fast. What's he doing now? Last I heard, he was trying to start his own consulting firm. But he can't get clients because everyone knows his history." I thought about this while reviewing my own client list. 12 companies, all of them happy, all of them growing, all of them referring new business to me. The contrast was striking. While Callum was struggling to rebuild a career he'd destroyed through his own actions, I was building an empire based on competence, integrity, and respect for other people. That evening, I opened a bottle of champagne and watched the sunset from my office window. The printer that had started it all sat on my desk, silent and harmless now. But it had taught me something important. Sometimes the things that seem like disasters are actually opportunities in disguise. 12 hours. That's how long it took for my life to go from complete disaster to complete triumph. 12 hours from being humiliated and fired to owning the contract that had built Trueform's reputation. 12 hours from being blamed for sabotage to becoming the owner of a multi-million-dollar business. 12 hours from feeling like my career was over to realizing it was just beginning. As I sit here now, 2 years later, looking out at the city from my corner office, I think about how different things could have been. If Callum hadn't been so vindictive, I might have stayed at Trueform forever. Loyal, hardworking, and completely undervalued. If the printer hadn't jammed, Harrison might never have seen how Trueform really treated their employees. If Brianna hadn't been brave enough to speak up, Callum might have gotten away with his sabotage. But sometimes the universe has a sense of justice that's more perfect than anything we could plan ourselves. They fired me over a printer jam. A broken machine that they'd neglected to fix, that their boss had deliberately sabotaged, that became the excuse for destroying my career. Now, every time they need to print an invoice, they're printing MY invoices. Every time they use that conference room, they're reminded of the employee they threw away. Every time they see my name on their client list, they remember the day they learned that loyalty has to go both ways. I kept the printer. It sits on my desk as a reminder of how quickly everything can change. And every morning when I come to work, it makes me smile. Because sometimes the best revenge is just living well. What's the biggest comeback you've ever witnessed? Drop your stories in the comments. I love hearing about moments when justice finally wins. And if this story inspired you, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of workplace revenge and sweet karma. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.